into, did you hear that? All right, friends, it is go time. Thank you guys for giving me your time today. As most of you know, I'm Rhonda Farr. Some of you have worked with me before. We've been in groups together before. I am an emotions coach, and more specifically, I help people understand how their emotions are sabotaging their relationships, their business goals, their whatever goals, right? Like it could be a physical goal, it could be anything. So today we're going to start out by understanding a little bit about how the brain works first. And this is very, very important. I promise you it's not going to be boring. At least I don't think it is. If you're on this call, I'm guessing that you love the self-help stuff as much as I do. So I'm going to start by sharing my screen. This is not like a PowerPoint display. I promise you. Sometimes those can get long and boring. But I have to show you what's going on with your brain before we start this. Okay. So this is just a little stick figure that we're going to start with, but I promise you it's the most important stick figure you're ever going to see. Now, some of you on this call may have seen this stick figure before. You may have heard me talk about it before. I first learned about it from Bob Proctor, but it actually originated with Dr. Thurman Fleet. He was a metaphysicist who was born in the late 1800s. And I haven't seen this model around as much as I think I should. So I have a mission to share it with everybody. It's so important. And I want to talk to you a little bit before I explain the model to you about you can use this method to help your clients if you're a coach. You can use this method to help your children if you're a parent. You can use this method and this model to help yourself with anything you want to once you understand it. Okay. I kind of got into the emotions work before I really understood what I was going to be doing. I found myself, actually, I'm going to stop sharing my screen while I tell you this for a moment. I found myself at one point having certified as a life coach. For those of you who are certified, who have thought about getting certified, you know that's a pretty big investment, right? And my family didn't really have a ton of money to invest at the time in that. And I found myself at one point waking up every single day, feeling sick to my stomach, feeling like I was going to throw up, feeling so much pressure to make this money back that I had invested. And I would think every day, I took this away from my kids. I took this money away from my kids. How am I going to give it back to them? It was so frustrating to me. So I finally got to the point and I thought, I don't want to feel this way every day. I'm just going to go work for another coach. I'm going to work and pay my money or pay my dues by working for somebody else who has figured this out. Sorry, people are joining, distracting me from my story. I'm glad we didn't get into the model yet. So I decided that I was going to apply for some jobs to work with other coaches who are making a lot more money than I was at the time. And I applied for them. I applied for a few of those jobs. And guess what? I didn't get them. I didn't get any of them. And it was so devastating to me because I still had this huge amount of money that I invested, taken from my family. That was my story at the time. I couldn't get this job. There was one day where I found myself literally on the floor. Some of you guys have heard this, in my bathroom floor, crying my eyeballs out. We have an older house that we had bought and we hadn't remodeled like hardly any of it at the time. Literally carpet. You guys see how long my hair is? I had brushed my hair in that bathroom. There's hair on the floor. It's disgusting, you guys. I'm in the fetal position. This is not a joke or an exaggeration. Crying, heaving. What am I going to do? I don't know how to do this. And I had this little whispering. I had this little prompting. Go do what you're telling everybody else to do. Go do the work that you have told everybody else is so amazing. So I picked myself up. I went in my room. I went over to lie down on the bed and I let myself feel it all. All the shame, all the embarrassment, all the disappointment, every single bit of it. I just let it run through me. And even in that moment, it felt awful. It felt terrible. But even in that moment, there was this inkling of this is going to change things. How could feeling like HELL on the bed change things? You guys, it was the best, most important thing I've ever done in my life. I ended up hiring a business coach who had worked for the life coach school, the school that I was trained and certified through, who said to me, you love doing emotions work? Why don't you teach other people about it? And I'm like, what? These are coaches and scholars. They already know about it. And she's like, no, people don't know about it. They act like they do, but they don't know about it. So I'm going to teach you guys one of the things that has come out of my lying on the bed, feeling like a complete fraud failure who could never make this work. And I'm going to show you how I started making it work. First of all, we've got to understand the brain. We've got to understand what is going on in the brain. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again and use this model by Dr. Thurman Fleet, one of the most important stick figures you're ever going to see in your life. So this big circle represents the brain. This big circle represents our head. And this is broken down very simplistically so we can get an idea of what's going on. There's a lot more to it, but today we're just going to work with two parts: our conscious and intellectual thinking in our higher brain and our subconscious lower brain. Okay. So what happens for most of us when we have a goal? We're all goal getters on here, right? When we have a goal, we might have a circumstance in our life and we're like, hey, this has changed. I think I need to do something different. Or we might just say, hey, I'm ready for a new adventure. I'm ready for a new goal. We have a new goal in our life. Or we might hear a whispering, like some people will call it a prompting of something that we're, quote, supposed to do, or something that we're capable of putting out into the world that we've never done before. And we could name this 100 other things, but I think you get the point. There's something outside of us for whatever reason calling to us. Okay. So a conscious intellectual brain or thought will enter our brain, right? We're like, I want to do X, Y, and Z. So I'm just going to use me for the example, since we're talking about my coaching experience. I had a thought, I'd like to make X amount of dollars. At the life coach school, it's always like, make $100,000. You literally get an award if you make $100,000, which is not my goal anymore, by the way, but that used to be, right? I want to make $100,000 as a life coach. So let's just pretend that I put this as a new goal. And intellectually, I see other people doing it. I see people making way more money than that. I see intellectually that it's possible for me to make this much money. So up here in my conscious brain, I can believe that is possible. What's going on down here in this lower brain is what kept me crying on the bathroom floor, sabotaging myself, right? Up until this point, my lower brain had always thought about myself, you're just a homemaker, just a homemaker. By the way, I don't think that actually, I think being a homemaker is amazing and taking care of kids is amazing if that's what you choose to do. But my brain kind of put it as a little lowly job, right? You're just a homemaker. You don't know how to make a lot of money. Your husband's supposed to make the money anyway, not you, by the way, which caused a lot of resentment for me, right? All these things that were down here in this subconscious lower brain that had been programmed into my thinking. Now, I've got to talk to you just a little bit about how we get things programmed into this lower subconscious brain. Between the ages of birth, so 0 to like 3, 4, your subconscious brain is wide open, you guys. Like it's just taking in everything and believing it as truth. So according to what family you grew up in, what religion you were taught or not taught, what you were taught about yourself, like the messages that people around you told you about you, you're storing that all in this subconscious lower brain without even questioning it. You're just like, yep, that's how we think about ourselves. That's how we think about life, right? And you're keeping it there. Now, here's where we get into tricky territory. And I'm going to show you in a different slide more, a little bit more in detail. But for now, here's where we get into trouble. When our subconscious lower brain thinking does not match up with this conscious intellectual thinking, right? So for me, I'm like, I don't know how to make a lot of money. My husband's supposed to do that anyway. If I work outside the home, my kids are going to suffer. Like you line it up down here in this subconscious brain, you name it, I had it. But up here, I'm like, oh, I think I can make $100,000, or I think I can make a living as a life coach. And so I try to incorporate this intellectual conscious thought into my being. It comes down here and my lower brain is like, nope, that doesn't fit. Nope, that doesn't work. Not going there, right? It felt terrible in my body. I was taught if we have a goal or a belief that we can do something, it should feel good and motivating. Imagine my surprise when it felt terrible inside my body. As a coach, as a parent, as a leader, as a human who wants to accomplish a goal, all of our work is done down here so we can match up our goals, our potential, our circumstances with our current thinking. Now, as you might guess, we're going to need to know what is in that subconscious lower brain if we're going to align it to a new goal. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing just for a minute so you can see my face a little bit more and talk to you about how this works. So, we see kids out into the world, and some people will say, yes, your thoughts create your feelings. I get that intellectually, but it just feels like whenever I'm out doing something, I don't have a conscious thought about it. It just feels like it just happens without my awareness. And they'll say, how is that? Do thoughts really create feelings, or do feelings create thoughts? And then it gets kind of muddy, right? And there is some debate about that. I will not proclaim to be the authority about that, but I will tell you what's happening and why we make that jump so quickly without a conscious thought. So I want you to imagine that we are walking along a park path and a snake slithers out. And you might think when that snake slithers out beside of you, right, that is reflexive. Okay. Like that's just a reflex, because we don't have a thought that quick, right? Like, hey, brain, look, there's a snake. It might be poisonous. Better be careful. We don't go through that, right? My oldest son, he blames me to this day for making him afraid of snakes. This is a true story. We had to share a home with my parents for a little while when we bought this house that we're living in now, because we had to do several renovations before we could even move in. And we were home with just me and the kids. And they live way out in the country, you guys. And there was a tiny little snake. Literally, if it was as big around as my pinky, I would be surprised. It was so tiny. But I freaked the freak out because I'm scared of snakes, right? There's that little guy who just pulled up. His name is Jackson. I don't know if you see him, but he's the one I did this to. Thanks for being here. He's joining us from Idaho today. So anyway, I freaked out. I put a bowl on it. I put books on it. Like I stacked. And I was like, don't go near it. Don't touch it. Some of my kids now are like, oh, snakes, and they love them. But Jackson was, in his words, traumatized by this, and it made him afraid of snakes forever, right? And to this day, it's like his knee jerk. As soon as he sees a snake, he's like, right? Here's why. He had a highly emotional response based on me, right? And then repetitive encounters with snakes. So after our subconscious brain kind of closes a little bit, remember I said from like 0 to 3 or 4, it starts closing a little bit. After that subconscious brain closes, we still interpret messages. And the main way we lock in that lower thinking consciousness or that lower thinking identity is through repetition and highly emotional situations. So we think about trauma, right? Like if somebody has been through something super traumatic, that is going to lock in a part of their being. They're going to start having an emotional response without a conscious thought, for sure, right? Even if it's not super traumatic, if it's lowercase t, like my sweet Jackson experienced from me, through repetition and emotional responses, we lock into that lower brain thinking some of those thoughts and beliefs that don't serve us very well as adults. Now, our brain does that to protect us, right? Like we want to think about something dangerous and not have to think for a long time, right? Like if we touch a hot stove or if we're about to walk out in traffic, like we don't want to have to take a long time to think about that. So our brain is being very efficient the way it was hardwired to do, but that just doesn't serve us when we're talking about accomplishing goals. Because what happens is the brain interprets a new goal as something physically dangerous, right? Our new goal becomes the poisonous snake. Our new goal becomes the intruder, so to speak, right? So our brain goes to it, says, oh, that feels terrible, push away. It's our knee-jerk reaction to do that. Okay, I'm going to share the screen again with you guys. And I'm going to flip slides. I think I'm going to have to push through 2 slides, but I want to show you something really fast. Do you see this? It is not instinct or a reflex to be afraid of snakes. Can you see? These kids did not get the conditioning that my kid got, right? Can you see if we like zoom in over here? This little kid is holding it in his hands. This kid is surrounded by snakes. He looked like he's about to fall asleep. You see the one in the back right there? Like this other kid's over here. He's holding the tail. He's holding the head, right? This is not reflexive. It's what we've been conditioned to think or do. I'm going to go back and show you this little girl crossing the street. I had a mom tell me one time, her son was approaching a busy street. And she said, I flipped out. He was like 2, right? Like, what are you doing? And it scared the kid to death, which is okay. It's normal. And of course, every time they came to the intersection again, she said, stop, look, right? Through repetition and highly emotional situations, she taught him not to walk out in traffic. This little girl, no clothes on, holding her hat, like she's walking out through a crosswalk with wild abandon. Now, reflex does come in, right? If there's a super loud truck or a horn blowing, yes, that's going to catch your attention and that's going to be reflexive. I'm driving this point home because I want you to know the brain starts to associate things with danger that aren't actually dangerous. Also, we want the brain to associate things with danger because it keeps us safe and alive. Our job is just to be able to interpret the things that we have in our subconscious thinking that help us and the things that we have in our subconscious thinking that sabotage us. Okay, so I'm going to go back to this funky little diagram, and I'm going to show you what this brain looks like, and I'm going to tell you what these symbols mean, okay? So I want you to think about your new goal, your new idea, this potential that you think you have out into the world. This is like a thought labeled why. It's something new we haven't thought before, because down in here where we have all of our old thinking, all of our conditioned beliefs, you can call those core beliefs, you can call those your paradigms, reinforced neural pathways, old wiring. If you're from the life coach school, you're going to call these your old models probably, right? All of this is down here in our X thinking, okay? It's just a part of who we are, especially at this age. Plus, if you're teaching this to your kids, right, it's things that they've picked up, not necessarily just from you, but from their peers, from social media, from TV, right? So what happens is we have the old thinking and then we have a new idea that we haven't done before. We're going to take this new idea and we're going to start thinking about it intellectually. Is that really something I want to do? Do I want to get that degree? Do I want to get that certification? Do I want to repair that relationship? We're going to start milling over it intellectually, right? So it starts to take form in our mind. But before we can really accomplish that goal, we have to drip it down into our being. Does that make sense to you guys? If you have questions, go ahead and type them in the chat box and I'll get to them after I stop sharing the screen. If we want to accomplish a goal, we have to start becoming that person. But as soon as we put that new goal down here in our lower thinking, our subconscious, our core being, it is not in harmony with what we've always thought about ourselves, with what we have always believed was possible for us, right? You see these lightning marks? Those are emotional vibrations in the body. So when our new goal does not match up with what we've always thought about ourselves and what is possible for us, it starts creating vibrations in the body. It starts creating emotional energetics in the body, right? Bob Proctor calls this the terror barrier, right? So I actually experienced the terror barrier in preparing this whole video for you or this whole presentation for you. I've never done a month-long mastermind before. I've taught some classes, I've taught some clients, I've taught a lot of clients, but I've never done something like this before. I had an idea, I can reach more people. I can teach people these goals. I can raise the emotional intelligence of the world if I teach this. I start milling it over. Yeah, it's a good idea. I think I can handle it. I start planning it and thinking about doing it. And I freak out. People don't care what I have to say. I'm going to sound stupid. They're not going to want to come. Even in preparing this, my brain did this, right? Then my body feels terrible. It's starting to feel with self-doubt. It's starting to feel with fear. It's starting to feel with all the things that under normal conditions, if I didn't know what was happening right here, would cause me to stop, to think it's not worth it, self-sabotage, and not do it, right? All of coaching, you guys who have clients, all you're doing is helping your clients line up these two things. You're walking with them through the terror barrier, helping them line up their old thoughts and beliefs with their new goal beliefs, X and Y. You're helping them line that up. When we have a child who is struggling and they're scared to death to do something, what we're doing is we're sitting with them as they calibrate, I like to say calibrate, or as we bring into harmony old beliefs with new possibilities. When you yourself are trying to accomplish a goal, all you're doing is you're trying to line up old thoughts and beliefs about yourself. Remember me, right? I just stay at home. My husband's supposed to make the money. I don't even know how to do an email, right? I knew how to do a regular email, but not like a business email list, like the one I flubbed up on yesterday, and I wrote the wrong words, and then I had a spelling error in the new email. Do you guys remember that? That's me. Like, oh, I don't even know how to do that stuff. And apparently I still have some things to learn. But those were all the things I was thinking about myself over here. But there was this idea. I have a talent for connecting people. I have a really strong passion and desire to learn about self-help and to teach people about it, right? That was my new idea. I think I might be able to actually make a career out of this. Whenever I tried to calibrate those two, felt terrible in my body. That's why I was on the bathroom floor, crying my eyeballs out, feeling embarrassed, full of shame, like the biggest failure you could imagine. It was because this did not match up with this, and I bumped up against the terror barrier. So what did I have to do? I had to be willing to feel terrible, you guys, move closer to what was happening so I could learn from it, right? So when I'm willing to feel the emotion, then I can step into, okay, why are you here? What are you trying to tell me? Oh, you're trying to tell me that your kids will suffer? Is that true? Maybe my kids won't suffer at all. Maybe I'll teach my kids about accomplishing goals and they can see what's possible for mom and what's possible for them too. Oh, you're trying to tell me that your husband's supposed to make all the money? Do you really believe that? What if you get to make your own money and choose how to spend it without consulting anybody? What if you get to make your own money and create some really cool things for your family? Oh, maybe this isn't a problem, right? I could go on and on with the list, but I want you to start thinking right now. And this is going to be your homework, by the way, that we're going to come back to. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment. This is going to be your homework that we're going to come back to, but I want you to start thinking throughout your life. When have you bumped up against that terror barrier? When have you felt super strong emotion in your body? When have you absorbed things from other people through repetition, through highly emotional situations, or even from yourself? When have you reinforced things with yourself that are staying stored in that X thinking, that lower thinking? That's what we have to do. We have to be able to sit with the discomfort of that strong emotion, to move in closer to it, to learn from it, to challenge it. I'm going to pause for a minute. I've been talking a lot. I don't see any questions in the chat box, but I want you guys to just raise your hand. And if we don't all speak at once, you could just unmute yourself. I want you to ask me your questions or share with me some insight that's popping up for you that maybe you haven't thought about before when we're talking about goals. Don't be shy. You guys want me to keep talking? Because I can, but I'd rather know how to fit this to you. What about somebody who maybe while I was talking said, oh yeah, I haven't noticed that before, but that was in my core thinking? Who would like to share something that maybe came up just for them personally that has been not quite in alignment or in harmony with a new goal, and you're noticing it and maybe you're ready to do something different with it? Nobody? Are you? This is time for me to give you feedback. Come on, guys. I want to give it to you. I want you to tell me what you're thinking. I thought somebody was moving in. Nikki's putting on her headset. Are you going to be the brave one?
I'll be the brave one. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so this is not, I don't know whether you call this goal. I'm working on improving my relationship with my mum.
Okay.
Can we use this as an example?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I guess like the pieces I'm working through, kind of like the conscious thinking is like, yeah, I want to improve it. And the subconscious is like all the habits that I'm in. And being on the phone, I'm thinking specifically, when we have a conversation, like my objective is to always, like in general, it's like, oh, there's a purpose to this conversation, right? And my mum's not very conscious anymore. And so often when I'm on the phone, and like there's lots of emotional baggage on top of this, but often when I'm talking on the, or when I most recently spoke to her on the phone, like I got on the phone and I hadn't really done my work, but we were having this conversation. You started talking about politics, but I had no idea um, what she was talking about, and I was not particularly like patient, or I was just telling my truth. Like, I guess this is another thought that subconsciously is like, oh, I just want to like tell you my truth, and I wasn't like. I get off the phone, and my husband's always like, what? What are you doing? Like, the objective in the conversation is not actually purposeful for me to tell my truth, but actually to connect with my mum. So I just think, like, when you talk about that, like this subconscious belief systems and the core belief systems that I have, and not integrating, like, oh, just to spend quality time with my mum, I'm just like, why are you telling me that, we recently had a premier of New South Wales who like has been investigated for fraud. And she was saying, oh, she shouldn't leave. And I just said to her, well, of course she shouldn't have like been doing, fraudulent things in the background of. And anyway, that was my thinking. And I got off the phone and I was like, oh, that's right. Like, my objective is not to have this intellectual conversation or to tell like my truth. It's like to connect with my mom. So that was my example.
Thank you for sharing that, Nikki. So when we come in, right, like we can look back if we were going to explore this deeper and say, throughout my life, where has this shown up when I want to interact with people to tell my truth? My objective is to speak what's on my mind, right? Like, where else is this showing up? If I were you and I were going to go deeper on that, sorry, when people show up in my waiting room, it's distracting me. But if I were going to go deeper on that, I would start looking at all the places, right, that has shown up for me. And then I would start questioning it. Like, what does connection look like? And do I want to think that way anymore? Perfect. I love it. Thank you for sharing, Nikki. Let's see. Natalie said, I love the word harmony. That really resonated with me in this context. I like the idea of moving from dissonant to harmony. Yes, yes, yes. And if we want to get all woo-woo on this, we can even talk about like moving into harmony with frequencies, like the law of attraction, right? Like, when you're stuck in those old emotions and when you're feeling like a fraud, a failure, the shame, the embarrassment, you're not even going to be in harmony with these new goals. Even if you take the right actions, right? Even if you think you're walking through the steps that look important, you're not going to be in harmony with the goal that you want. Did anybody else want to share something? I see a camera coming on here or there. I would love to hear your insights. A few years ago, no, maybe a year or two ago, actually, Natalie, who just made that comment, she suggested in book club that we read this book. It was called Moment of Lift. It's by Melinda Gates. But basically, she was talking about how she would go into these very poverty-stricken communities and try to teach these women how to up-level their lives. Like, she would give them skills, and she was finding out what wasn't working, and they would go and try to really up-level and improve the quality of life for these people. And she gave an analogy that I have never forgotten. She talked about how when we go in to help people, we look at this and we're pretending that they have a glass, right? And she said, we look at them like their glass is empty and we're just here to fill their glass. We're going to fill it with all the knowledge and insight and information that we have. But she said, what we found was their glass wasn't empty. Their glass was full of their culture, their traditions, their beliefs. And she said, then we would go in and we would try to pour on top of it all of the water or all of the sustenance, right, so to speak, that we had to offer. But when their glass was full of their stuff and we were pulling on top of it, a tiny bit of what we were offering may have gotten in the glass, but most of it was pouring over the sides. They were missing it, right? It's the same thing with this subconscious brain and this subconscious thinking. We have so much in there and we're like, hey, let me go ahead and bring in all these new things, these new goals, these new ideas. and we try to bring them in, right? But if we're not aware of what's already in the glass, what's already in our thinking, most of it's not going to stick, right? We're going to try to do some actions. We're going to try to take some steps, but it's not going to stay with us because we haven't observed and gotten close enough to learn from what's in the cup, right? So for the Gates, when they were going into these communities, they had to learn, why are they doing things this way? Where did this come from, right? How does this serve them in their community, in their culture that I have no idea about, by the way, right? Like, how does this serve them? Why do they choose to keep it? If we can approach them with understanding those things, we can better see what their needs are, right? And we can see that the way they're doing it isn't giving them the quality of life they want, but they also want something that serves this need that they're trying to fill in their own way, right? So the way they're actually able to help them is by getting to know them, by spending time with them, which is exactly what we have to do with our subconscious brain, those old X thoughts, right? That old thinking. We've got to get to know that, move in. And the skill of this is being able to tolerate sitting in that discomfort. That's where most people quit. 99% of people will quit when they bump up against that terror barrier. That's the truth. But if you know what's happening and it feels awful in your body, what you're going to do is say, man, this feels awful, but I know what's happening. I want you to listen to two stories. I'm going to tell you the same story in two different ways. I'm trying to be a life coach. I'm trying to make money. I've got 4 kids at home. I think my husband should do it all, right? And he hasn't been doing what I think he should do, blah, 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 right? So I start to try to do it. I spend a lot of money on certification and I put myself out there and apply for jobs and I don't get them. So I could tell 2 stories. I could say, hey, I just don't know how to do this. I'm not cut out for it. This was a super bad idea. I tried really hard and I can't. I'm done, right? I could tell you that story. Or I could say, hey, I'm trying to accomplish this new goal that I've never accomplished before. And when I introduced that into my life, my brain freaked out. And it felt really terrible in my body. And I know what's happening because I've never done this before. So it's causing a lot of discomfort. I'm going to sit with it and I'm going to feel it. And I'm going to keep understanding why those emotions are coming up over and over until I calibrate those. It's the same story, you guys. It's the same thing happening. But when we know what's going on in our brain, we don't have to give up. We're just like, okay, welcome. I hear you. I see you. Your lower brain is the language of has the language of emotion. Okay. So when emotion comes up, it's just your lower brain trying to communicate to you. Something you're doing is out of alignment with what you're used to doing and thinking. That's all. When you have a strong emotion, I'm going to repeat that again because this is very, very important. When you have a strong emotion, your lower brain is saying something feels out of alignment with who we've been at our core up until this point. That's it. Even if somebody we love dies and we feel a strong emotion of grief, it's the same thing happening. Now, we want to keep that emotion, right? We're not going to be like, hey, let's calibrate till we feel super happy about this. No, probably not. But we can look at it in the same way. We have these core beliefs that we love this person. We should be able to communicate with them. We want them in our lives, right? If they pass away, especially unexpectedly, we're going to have really strong emotion. I should have said goodbye. This shouldn't have happened this way. It was too soon. They were too young. I wasn't expecting it, right? The circumstance, what we're having to incorporate in our life is out of alignment with what we thought was true and would be true, right? And so we feel strong emotion. We feel grief. Do we want to get rid of that grief? No, probably not. I'm a human, not a robot, not a sociopath. So I would just want to hear what it's communicating to me. Oh, we got some questions coming in. We just want to hear it though, right? Like we don't always want to calibrate. And as we let emotion pass through us, it does settle. If you've worked with me before, you know that's my secret sauce of helping you calibrate. And throughout the next couple of weeks, we're going to talk about so much more than this. We're going to talk about bringing that goal in and nourishing it and feeling intentional, positive emotion on purpose. We're going to talk about so much more. But today is just the foundation of goal creation that 99% of people miss. 99% of people will never start here. They'll bump up against a terror barrier and they're out. So we got so much more, you guys. I want you to know that, but this is where we start. Okay, I'm going to go to the chat box. Do you think positive emotions also come from the lower subconscious brain or only the negative emotions? Oh, that's such a good question. So Amy, if we have this thought like, I'm going to marry Prince Charming and we're going to have this beautiful wedding, right? And things line up just perfectly, you probably will feel satisfaction, right? You probably will feel like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. That's also a really good question too, right? I'm going to kind of spin it back to the negative, but I promise you I'll bring it back. So we think about people who grow up in a home that is abusive, physically abusive, like it's painful. Physically, it hurts. It's also emotionally abusive, right? Emotionally, it hurts. A super high percentage, and I'm not going to give you the number because I didn't look it up exactly, but a very high percentage of children who grow up in abusive homes will marry somebody who is abusive and repeat that pattern. Now, I want you to think about this. In their mind as a child, they probably thought, this sucks, this is terrible, I hate this, right? So one might say that shouldn't be in their core thinking. But what's actually happening is, even if it physically hurts, their brain is seeing it and they're saying, oh, husbands hit wives. It sucks and we cry a lot and we feel terrible. Physically, we feel terrible, emotionally feel terrible, but that's how marriages are, right? And so they go into a relationship and perhaps they date somebody who doesn't hurt them. Many, many women will self-sabotage because it's not comfortable. It's not familiar, right? Their core belief is marriages are dangerous. They're volatile. The brain hates to be challenged at its core, right? It hates to be wrong. So it literally will create situations where it's right. So for me, I didn't grow up in an abusive home like in that way, right? Or in any way, that sounded bad. I didn't grow up in a physically abusive home. So if I am dating somebody and they grab me by the wrist or they're like physically aggressive, my brain is going to say, whoa, out of alignment. And I'm probably not going to hang around very long, right? But if somebody else gets grabbed by the arm who does have that core belief that marriage is volatile, they're going to be like, man, that hurt. Like physically, they're going to feel the pain, but it's going to feel familiar. Oh yeah, that's what men do. Oh yeah, I shouldn't have made him mad. Oh yeah, this is how it happens, right? So our brain will make things that feel familiar or comfortable normal, right? Because it's in alignment with what we know. Now, to go back to Amy's point, right? Like if I'm in a marriage and I'm like, yes, husbands are do this, X, Y, and Z. This feels so good. And he's lining up. He's meeting all of my manual items that I had written out in my brain, right? I might feel some satisfaction. I might feel good about that, right? I also probably will start to overlook those, Amy, like over time, right? We won't even notice them anymore. Because I know I've done that as well. So thank you for that question. Okay, Nikki says, do you have any thoughts about the difference between intuition and fear from moving towards something new? How do you differentiate between the two? I actually wrote this this quote down, Nikki, that I think addresses this pretty well. It's Jeremy Goldberg, and I'm going to read it just so I make sure I get it mostly right. He said, courage is knowing it might hurt and doing it anyway. Stupidity is also knowing that it might hurt and doing it anyway, right? And so he's making the point, like there's a very, very fine line of saying, okay, this feels terrible and this is hard, but I'm going to do it anyway. So Nikki, we're going to talk a little bit more about this in the weeks to come, but here's my thought and my belief. And I would love to know if somebody else has a thought about this on the call. And Nikki, if you have insight, please share it. If we have a desire to do something, like if we have this thing that we just keep coming back to, some people might call it a spiritual prompting. Some people might call it a calling in their life. I have clients who are entrepreneurs who are trying new things, several artists who would say, this is just who I am at my being. Like it's me being self-actualized when I do this work. If you have a feeling inside you like that, that just keeps whispering, it just keeps calling to you, it feels like who you are, I believe that that is like our intuition. That is our alignment for what we want to become in the world. So the difference between intuition and fear from moving towards something new, right? So if we feel that desire, we want to do it, we have chosen to do it, we feel like we've made it a commitment to do it. When we bump up against that terror barrier, that's when we know we want to calibrate, right? If there's something that's like, it literally feels terrible in your body, it feels like something you're not interested in, like the long-term results of it, you're like, meh, whatever. It might not be something that you're willing to cross the terror barrier for, but you get to decide that. And really knowing your reason why you're willing to do that is super important. So if you have a follow-up to this or anything to share, you can raise your hand or just unmute yourself. Elizabeth says, I love the idea of figuring out how what we've always done is serving us rather than just trying to change it, trying to understand it. Yeah. So if you're familiar with the model, what we often do is be like, okay, I feel terrible. Let me figure out a new model on paper that will help me just feel better. You can try that if you want to, but it's not going to last. It's not going to stick. When you hear a client or you yourself saying, intellectually, I get it, but I just don't know how to breathe into it. I don't know how to feel it. I don't know how to live it every day. That means you need to go back, understand what's in that X thinking, your subconscious. You need to understand it from every angle, because it's going to be very, very difficult to live into your core being with this new goal if you haven't gotten very familiar and tried to understand it. Also, somebody's asking where the replay will be. Oh my goodness, somebody is sick and feels terrible and had to leave. So I will send the replay out in an email, just like I sent the link. So I will go ahead and do that. If you miss part of it, if you're joining late, check your email. Does anybody have any thoughts and questions to add before we wrap up? Yes, Chelsea, come on, sister.
Like when we're saying this terror barrier, I'm just picturing like Red Rover with like a bunch of huge linebackers. Like that's the thing where it's like, remember that feeling when you're trying, like, you're like, I just got to get through this and then I'm going to win. That's how you win the game, is you got to get through the barrier. But I'm like, how do you, like, what strategies do you have when you're like, you know, that point where you're like, my arms are ripping and you're like, this is not feel like, and all of a sudden you're like, I don't even want to win this. I don't care. And then you like go back to the team looking like a loser. I'm like, I feel like I just keep playing Red Rover because I'm like, okay, I'm going to do the thing, you know, it's like Moana. I'm like, I hear the ocean. It's calling. I'm going to do something with my life. And then I go to the terror barrier and then I just run back after a while. I'm like, I can't, like, how do you get through it? Like you're saying, sit with it, but it's like you sit with it and you just keep being like, yeah, these guys are really big. I can't push through. Like, I don't know how, like, when does it go away?
Okay, that's super good question. So when does it go away? That question just lets you know that you're not willing, not that you're not willing, but we just haven't learned enough, right? When does it go away? Lets you know that your brain's more interested in feeling better than learning in the moment. And that's okay. My brain does that a lot too. So just notice that, like, your brain is very, very motivated to not be in pain. And that's okay. Most of us are. But that's a super good question. We're going to spend the next few weeks talking about this and how to do it. But here is the Reader's Digest version of that. So let's use the Red Rover example. And I love Chelsea for bringing the humor to all of this. Any of you know her in real life? That is her. Everything's a good time with Miss Chelsea. But here's what we do, right? Let's say the linebacker linking arms together, right? We can't get through. They're knocking us flat on our butt or slingshotting us all the way back to the other team like a loser. Here's what we do if we're willing to sit with that. If we're not, let's start about if we're not willing to sit with it. We might quit playing the game. We might get super angry and go tell everybody why they suck, right? And why you're never playing again. And we might go hide in the corner or lay on the bathroom floor in the fetal position, right? And we might cry about it and say, this stinks. I'm never doing this again. If we're willing to feel humiliated in front of the linebackers, if we're willing to stay in the game, what happens is we might start noticing one of the linebackers is huge, but he has a knee brace on, right? He might look strong, but we notice, maybe there's something there that we could get through. Or we might get closer to the linebacker and we notice that if we give him a big old hug, he might let go of the person beside him. Emotions are like that. If you accept them and you embrace them, you love on them, they usually loosen their hold on you a little bit, right? But we're not doing it. We're not staying in the game or running from the game just so we'll feel better. We're staying in the game to learn from why we're afraid, to learn about what strategies might be better or worse. And I'm going to give you some of those as we move forward. We've got meditations. I've got specific processes to process your emotions. I have got just journaling ideas. I've got tools for that. So I got you, sister. We're going to do it, but I don't want to throw those out today because I really want you to start looking at what's in your thinking first, because you're not even going to know the strategies to use or how to use them if you're not aware of what's in that thinking. And for this homework, I would choose one goal, right? Like we could say we want to lose 10 pounds. We want to make $50,000. We want to have the marriage of our dreams, blah, blah, blah. Like we could put all those out there. Don't do that yet. You're going to get overwhelmed. You're going to not want to stay in the Red Rover game, so to speak, right? So choose one goal. Start noticing all the places where these subconscious thoughts, feelings, beliefs, core identifiers are coming up for you. And I'm going to tell you what to do with them next. Okay. Let's see. There was a question for Nikki. What do you think about the intuition versus fear? I think there's a difference of a gentle pull versus a more aggressive push feeling. What do you think? So this was from Nikki or for Nikki. So do you want to respond, Nikki?
Oh, that's so interesting. I wanted to hear other people's opinion about that. A gentle pull versus a more aggressive push. I love that you've articulated that, Bonnie, in that way. I don't know if I would explain it myself in that way. Rhonda, I'm interested here. I think it's a meta skill to be able to develop, like, I think I separate our thinking brain, just like you talked about, Rhonda. So I call it like integrity. And then our intuition is the body, like, and our subconscious thinking. But also, I think there's a little bit more to that. I think there's a little bit more woo to that. It's kind of like our inner, I don't use the word soul, but the intuition comes from our knowing and it's something that's very like core to our being. And I think that when they're aligned, to me, it feels like grounding. Like to me, it feels like that alignment, even though I feel fear up in the top of my body, which is very like, it feels like movement and it feels kind of distracting. Whereas intuition, even though that can happen at the same time as this grounding feeling of like, yes, that's direction. And I think that sometimes when I first started doing this work, I was so afraid. It felt like I was wearing blinkers because I would just step forward. And also I was doing, I was doing master coach training, which was a very intensive training program where sometimes I felt like I didn't have a choice to choose. And so I wasn't learning how to check in with my intuition. And so I would just keep moving forward and there was just fear. And it was only after doing that and really stepping into being able to, in my opinion, making those personal choices for me that I started working on the meta skill of being able to feel into my intuition. And so then I use the integrity, so the thinking part of my brain, and then start like looking for the grounding. But I'd love to hear more of what other people. Rhonda, what are your thoughts?
Thank you for sharing that. Nikki is joining us from Australia. Isn't she so cute when she speaks? Love her accent. Yeah, I don't know if you could hear her very well. My volume's a little bit low, but she said it's a little more woo, W-O-O. And basically what she means by that, for those of you who are new to this, is just getting into that spiritual work, that attraction work, law of attraction type thinking, right? But we can feel fear in the body. Like Nikki was saying, we can feel fear because our old thinking and our new goal aren't calibrated yet, but also feel grounded in our decision to move forward, especially if we know why we're doing it and if we have committed to doing it no matter what. Some people who are less emotional or less feeling, like they don't get as emotionally involved in things than I do, they'll say, well, when I make a decision, it's as good as done. Like they don't get bogged down. Everybody doesn't get bogged down in that old thinking and that new thinking. And that's okay, right? I'm guessing you're on this call because you have had trouble. You're a bit like Chelsea described in the Red Rover game. You run as hard as you can toward your goal. You hit that barrier, right? And then it flings you back this way. Then you take a breather, maybe cry on the floor for a moment. Then you run again as hard as you can towards the goal. And you just keep flip-flopping back and forth like a rag doll, right? Some people are really able to say, nope, it's as good as done. I don't care what I'm feeling. They're able to muscle their way through it. I will offer, this is my thought and my opinion about this. Even if you're doing that and you're accomplishing external results, you're probably missing a closer connected relationship with yourself and your core being. So I just want to throw that out there. Like, you can accomplish external results and still miss that beautiful connection and learning and growth that is on the inside. So I love the woo, Sharon says. Yes, me too. I love the woo as well. Any advice when it's difficult to pick one goal with so many choices? Sharon, I don't mean this to be flippant, but this is really the way I think about it. Just pick one, because you've got your whole life. This is the way I think about it. I'm going to go back and share my screen before we finish. I'm going to tell you why I think you should just pick one. Because what's going to happen is you're going to have this goal, and I'm going to get my pen out here if I can. Oh, it's not going to let me. Anyway, we're going to go over here and we're going to say we have this goal, right? And Sharon, let's pretend that this is your old thinking and you decided to repair some type of relationship. Let's just pretend. I have no idea what your options are. And so let's say you put it down here where this Y is, and it's not in harmony, and you feel the terror barrier, and you sit with it. You understand where it's coming from. You challenge this old thinking. You kind of rewrite what you think about it. You poke a lot of holes in these core beliefs, and you decide you don't want them anymore, and it calibrates. And so let's say this X turns into a Y. I wish I could draw with it. It just keeps changing. Sorry. But let's say this blue X turns into a Y. So now you have YY thinking, and your body calms down a little bit. As Nikki said, your soul, right? Like, it calms a little bit. But what will happen as soon as you get this calibrated and you feel better, it's just the way the brain works. You're going to say, I actually wish that I could accomplish this. And we're going to put a Z up here, right? Let's say you repaired that relationship. That feels good. And then you're going to say, I want to lose 20 pounds. Or then you're going to say, I want to make $50,000. Or I want to accomplish this degree or this certification. And so then you're going to insert the Z into your intellectual thinking. You're going to start thinking about it. You're going to drop that Z, and it's going to be out of harmony. Now you're going to have a Y and a Z. And you're going to have to sit with it. And you're going to have to challenge this part of your thinking. It'll be a new part of your thinking that's challenged, right? And it'll feel terrible. And you'll have to learn, and you'll have to calibrate. And then your Z's will match up. And then you'll be like, actually, I'd like to blah, blah, blah. The brain is hardwired for growth. The brain is hardwired to become, this has a negative connotation, but I'm going to use this word anyway, because it's the only thing that's coming to my mind, dissatisfied. Dissatisfied is not a bad thing. We are talking on Zoom today because somebody was dissatisfied with the way they had to communicate before. You have a phone by your side because somebody was dissatisfied about riding a horse to somebody's house to get messages, right? You have a watch on your hand because somebody was dissatisfied with reading the stars and the moon. It doesn't mean they hated reading the stars and the moon. We still love the stars and the moon. We still welcome them. We're grateful for what we have. And we believe just maybe there's a spark of something inside of us telling us we could up level and grow, right? So Sharon, I hope that answers your question. Just pick one. It's totally fine, because your brain will say, as soon as you calibrate that, hey, why don't we work on this? It's just the way the brain works. Other thoughts and questions? We're right at the hour. I don't want to keep you guys past the hour, but if anybody has anything else to share, any insights, I'd love for you to do it. Oh, you're so welcome. You're so welcome. So we're going to build off today. Today was just the foundation of how the brain works when we're accomplishing goals. We're going to get into some of the things that you guys asked about, like what are the tools we use to calibrate? How do we create emotion on purpose? How do we know what we're working towards? Oh, thank you for coming. You're so welcome, all of you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Here's your homework. I'm going to articulate it one more time. So jot it down. Actually, it's on a slide, so you can take a screenshot of it if that's okay. I'm going to put it over here. So screenshot, 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 so you don't have to write it all down. Can you guys see that whole screen? So I want you to think of an emotion that you feel often. Okay, remember what we said. Your subconscious communicates to you through emotion. I want you to explore the timeline of this emotion. Imagine or think of all the places it's shown up in your life. From the time you're a small child, probably, right? What circumstances come up when you think about the timeline of this emotion? What related emotions come up when you think about the timeline of this emotion? I want you to take special note that circumstances are being stored in your subconscious as X thinking, and they're running your life. This is important, you guys, this last sentence. Our subconscious mind dictates our habitual behaviors, and about 90% of your human behavior, my human behavior, everybody's human behavior, about 90% of it is habitual. Do you know what that means? Your subconscious is running your day-to-day life, and most of us don't even know what's in there. We didn't intentionally program it. Our parents, leaders, TV, they didn't intentionally put it there. They were willy-nilly. I wish I knew this stuff when my kids were small. Sorry, Jackson. I would do it differently if I knew, right? Do you see our lives? 90% of the way we're living every day is coming from crap that we absorbed without knowing, that people gave us without them knowing they gave it to us. It is time that we start understanding what's in there, you guys, so we can start creating something different. Next week, I'm going to start talking to you about how we intentionally program the subconscious so we can intentionally have new thoughts and beliefs that are more in alignment with what we want to create. But for now, for today, I want you to start with this homework of figuring out what's in there, okay? That is how we move forward. All right, friends, we are at the hour, exactly 4 o'clock. Look for your email for the replay. Thank you for being here. Next Tuesday, same time, I'll see you there. Bye, guys.